welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. Today, we are continuing our discussion on Borderlands and the Mexican-American Story by David Dorado Romo.
Excellent.
Okay, so we left off finishing chapter 8, and now we're going to start the second half.
Yeah, there's a lot more important history here, and history that also hits close to home again.
Yeah. I think at the very beginning of this section, I think it's important to look at David's discussion of what he calls social revolution, or what is social revolution. That's 162, so it's like right there by the beginning, right? The world's first major social revolution of the 20th century deeply transformed both Mexico and the U.S. borderlands. Social revolutions change more than just political parties. They transform the relations between the rich and the poor, the culture, and the way of life of the society. So I like that. It's kind of a introduction to here, these new sections.
And then also how, I really like how this chapter does situate the history of the border within the Mexican Revolution, and how the border became the apex for the revolution itself.
Yeah. And again, for those unfamiliar, you should check out David's earlier work, Ringside Seat to a Revolution.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't mention this in the first episode, but I know when all of us studied literature, and I remember when we were in school, I remember like sometimes the instructors would tell us, okay, don't call the author by their first name. You don't know them personally. But this whole time I keep saying David. I'm like, well, I know him personally. So
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to use it this time. Okay. I've been waiting for my chance to do this. No, we've done it obviously plenty of times because of friends we've covered before.
Right.
We do know them.
Yeah. Right, because the academic way, you would Romo says. That's the way we teach it. But in this case, like I said, we do know him.
Yeah.
Shout out to David.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, kind of what you were saying, right, about the ringside seat to a revolution. I actually haven't read it, but I do know of it, and knowing David as well, because you said, like you said, right, he's not just a traditional historian in terms of literature, but also an oral historian, and so that's where I have listened to David share a lot of these stories.
Yeah. So kind of something that we pick up a lot in these chapters, right, is essentially population growth, right, of Mexican Americans growing wildly, and I think as a result of that, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-Mexican sentiment, beginnings of it. Well, not the beginnings of it, but definitely an uprising in it.
And so, of course, we also get the the story of Pancho Villa, and so many of us here in the border, right, have family who like rode with him, or the soldaderas included as well. But other stories that they people probably have not heard, right, like the Fort Bliss refugee camp that our colleague over at UTEP, Yolanda Leiva, has shared how during that Mexican Revolution, it was women and children that suffered the most casualties from violence, hunger, and disease. And when I saw that image, on 173 of the camp, I mean, it of course brought to mind the Tornillo camp, and also the how I think now for Bliss they're constructing a new immigration detention facility as well. So
Right.
kind of going back again, history repeating itself.
So I don't know if I'm glad you mentioned Yolanda too. It's so cool to hear people that like make appearances. Like this book. There's a couple others like Mask later on. Victor, I know personally, I've known for a while, and even Maria Skinka, who did the poem. Like, whoa, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see their names and you're like, oh my God, I know them.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite sections of the entire book is on corridos here on 175, kind of being the newspaper of the people. The newspaper of the poor is actually the way he says it, right? And just a way of like you're saying, oral histories, right? Through the music, through the lyrics, and mythologizing some of the heroes, right? Some of the people who were like resisting and fighting. That's just historically, I think, just in general, something music has done. It's the same thing in like in African American history too, right? The story of the griots who would like tell stories from village to village. And that's kind of one of the bases of hip hop, you know? And so you see this theme throughout human history that when we're silenced, you can't silence us, right? Like we're gonna come even harder in our music and our songs as an act of resistance. So I definitely love this section here.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. Like music plays such a heavy role throughout history. You have hymns, you have corridos, and just music is a way to get people together, to not only celebrate things, but also to bring attention to things. I think it's really cool that they touched on that here too.
Yeah. Yeah. Music as a political tool, right? But also like as a social tool. I know you, Richie, talk a lot about bebop, the role that it played, it influencing literature and vice versa. But even the corridos themselves, there's also the complication of like narco corridos, that do, have some problematic issues, right? Because they glorify narcos. So, I mean, that's just the way that things go sometimes, right? Music can be both a positive and a negative influence, just like any other art form.
I mean, to me, one of the most legendary stories of the region is of Carmelita Torres. And I love that he dives into it more. And I wish more people knew her story or knows her story. So this is one way. There's another book out my friend had written. Megan, hold on, let me look it up really quick.
Yeah, Megan O'Toole.
Megan O'Toole, and then it was illustrated by. I'm so terrible at this right now. Hold on, sorry. But yeah,
I thought you said you were
there is a
ready. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just thought of this right now.
Ready to throw down and
Ashlyn. Anyway, I did want to give a shout out to Megan O'Toole though, and her book on Carmelita Torres, or play. She did a radio play that I think was then published. So that's another look into this story. But yeah, this one resonated really well too, because again, you kind of have like these stories that persist. This idea of like using toxic chemicals to clean, right? Immigrants coming through, and just this again highlighting like resistance, not just any resistance, but from women historically. And I think that's a great thing to point out.
yeah. And I want to say that we had seen her story referenced in, was it like Women of Light or like, Witches of El Paso, right? Because I want to say like we've talked about it before here in this setting.
Yeah, I know when we covered How to Lie to a Customs Agent, Carlos has a poem specifically too about her.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, what is it that they also call this? The Bath riots, and how unfortunately, of course, it also ended up influencing the Nazis. Later on, because of the use of Cyclone B.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The fact that he's able, David, not just in this instance, but in several other instances, is able to literally take quotes from Nazis and how they were influenced by what they saw the United States doing here on the border with Mexican immigrants and even with Native Americans, influencing the way they followed through on the Holocaust.
Yeah.
It's there.
And I like how he also shows us, the newspaper, the telegram, right? Like these historical artifacts.
And it's I mean, it's dangerous. And again, why we keep referring to this fact that why we study history, you see patterns, and you it's dangerous rhetoric, right? And then we get into eugenics and this idea of inferiority, superiority, like superior genes, and it's the kind of stuff that it leads to, right? Seeing those signs. So I think that's the next section, right?
Yeah.
Racial cleansing and master race.
But yeah, I do talk to my students about this, their experience at the border. Because where I teach, Rio Grande, there's so many students do cross. And, we talk about in relation to Jose Olivares' poems about deportation and immigration. But, many have shared like so many problematic encounters that they have, not just with Border Patrol, but with, the customs and, being frisks, right? Which brings up, the way that they are racially profiled as well.
Yeah, the laws that kind of enable that kind of racial profiling, like it's going to continue in these upcoming chapters. Oh man.
Yeah, because you do see, it didn't start with, President Trump, of course, and it goes back the ways, right? I mean, even from the first section, we've talked about the problematic views of Mexicans with U.S. presidents and the government itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So for youth who are kind of living through this today and seeing it, as they maybe read this, see that it's happened before, and why people are concerned, truly, and saying these things, like to be wary of. That it's not just made up thing. It's historically has happened. People who lived here, people like, again, as David points out, people who lived in the region before it was even the United States, and were eventually their family giving citizenship because they lived in the land, right? Being deported, right? These mass illegal deportations
Under the guise of repatriation. Right? Yeah.
right?
And then also going back to the Nazis, of course, as you mentioned, right? I mean, they led to different effects and consequences with the Holocaust. But nowadays, of course, we see Nazis again, right? People doing Sieg Heils and popular music figures, saying like "I love Hitler," right? And so it's important to kind of see like what this history was, how one side, like how border history connects to world history as well. And because many times people try to minimize the connection, right? The Overton window of how, like to see a Nazi, they're a Nazi, like is an exaggeration, right? But if you study this, right, you see the connections.
Wasn't there a term? I can't remember off the top of my head, since you bring that up now, where like the concept of consistently bringing up like Hitler, Nazis, fascism. This is a common tactic, of course, used when like you see fascism like rearing its head, but a lot of people criticizing that as not tagging as maybe like not your critique fails at that point, but it's not too far off when you see the patterns and the signs, right? Can't really blame people for making those connections and seeing what's happened in history,
right?
So yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of parallels too on how Nazi Germany took inspo from expelling immigrants, for example, or the big talking point of like taking jobs, right? You hear time and time again,
right? But yeah, my next one here was on page 200.
Oh yeah, the walkout. That's literally where I
Yeah.
was at.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, we talked about Bowie High School before. And so here, we get the history of the walkout. And kind of more of like thinking about how it is. And this won't be the last time that, Bowie will play a role historically. But, we get the students here. And kind of going back to the importance of the press, right? The El Paso Herald here,
Yeah.
Publishing articles that students felt insulted their dignity, David writes. And, kind of, this was a 1937. But, yeah, I mean,
I do like the way he covered the story and like all the dynamics behind it, and how even adults criticize these kids for, where they call them hoodlums and the mayor scolding them, and but really them not folding, right?
But yeah, I mean, you can see why this happened in this way in Bowie, that I don't think, would have happened. They would have had the same response if it would have been like Franklin or something, right? So it goes back to like the history of Bowie as like the first, well, not the first, but like the biggest high school with the biggest Mexican American population in El Paso.
Yeah. And you, through this, you also kind of have Bowie being the kind of battleground. Well, it also for that's later on in the book, but like even just like the speak English only kind of thing. And David has a section at the end of this chapter about the relationship of language and colonialism, which is why you see him now starting to lead these classes on not what, right? To like reteach it.
Yeah.
I think I even saw Ruby make a post about that today. Like,
Yeah, I saw
say,
that.
well, what's your name? Who are you? Or who are you? And then it's like planting seeds.
Yeah, I really like that. The idea of reclaiming language.
Decolonization.
To fight against the double colonization, right, that he refers to here from both Anglos and the Spanish.
Yeah.
And in Bowie again, right, in the next chapter, now in looking at education and again, kind of Bowie being the focal point because of how school for them was just kind of like the, what do we call it? The workplace related, right? Where it was like, how to do laundry, how to like these very basic jobs, menial jobs, because again of like the racism and that, this is all you're going to do in life, right? You're just going to be a mechanic or you're just going to be a maid. But yeah, this was, and specifically tied to the Ku Klux Klan, right?
Yeah.
Of all, which we've talked about before with going back to like our second or third book, what's it called?
Black
Klansman. Yeah. So again, just not many people would think, right, that the Ku Klux Klan had a role here, but they did, and so this is them taking over the school board. And so it kind of brings about the importance of like understanding, who makes these decisions, right, that affect the kids, that affect their own livelihoods.
Yeah, I think there's a section later, I'm not sure exactly where, but there's like a student trying to take a chemistry class and she's told that she can't enroll in that course because those classes or science classes are only for students who plan on going to college, which is crazy to like even think that they were preventing this student from even being able to try to pursue something bigger.
Right.
They were being told like, no, this is where you belong and this is where you're going to kind of stay. Rather than seeing the students' ambitions and desire to like learn more and encouraging that.
No, yeah. I mean, and you see it with like counselors that do sometimes have that mentality. So not just like teachers or like, the people in the classroom, but that are, pushing these practices down. Because I had a counselor, I don't know if I told you, but my counselor in high school was, I was talking about my plans, and he was generally supportive. But then I mentioned, oh well, what about like, if I get a PhD? And then he's like, oh well, you have to write a book for that. And then he made it sound like, oh, like that's gonna stop me, and so that's what I mean as well. It was very pervasive. But jokes on him, because I was the valedictorian, and so I ended up getting the top of my class, and but I just feel bad for other students who have these kinds of counselors that don't push them, don't encourage their dreams, just because they're Mexican or Mexican American.
Yeah.
My next one was on 220.
The braceros.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, so just hear more of the way that the Mexican body was subjected to torture, basically, and toxic fumes from the DDT. So the braceros, of which again, we can talk about Yolanda Leyva, because she is literally setting up the first bracero museum over there, I believe, in San Eli, through the support of, I want to say, the Ballin Foundation. And she's collected all these oral histories, right? Going back to oral history of braceros, many of which did end up returning to the Mexico voluntarily, but many of which were forced to return. But here again, going back to Carmelita Torres, and how is it that they suffered the same way, all because of a pretext of being dirty or being infected with something.
Yeah, like how there's a recollection of the story, and this kid, recalls and calling them vampires.
Mm-hmm.
The land of vampires.
Yeah.
So I like these next two sections a lot, because it goes over a lot of the culture that we still kind of see today, and from the Zoot Suits to Pachucos to even Don Tosti, who is a legend in El Paso. When we talk about musicians from El Paso and El Paso, Don Tosti is like one of the big names. And I don't know if you guys have heard Pachuco Boogie. You can listen to it. It's on YouTube. Pretty fun, and I like how David talks about like how a lot of the ensembles come from different areas of the world, and then you study ethnomusicology, right? He mentions it here, how it's music that brings together swing, boogie woogie, jump blues, mambo, Afro Latino rhythms, and they even do like a spoken word, kind of like talking over the music, which you didn't hear a whole lot that time. So it's fun. And of course, the Zoot Suits and the idea behind Pachuco. We always talk about the origins of that. I know people are divided on where that actually comes from. The shoe company. I don't know if you guys have heard that one.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's funny because I was actually talking about that with my grandma yesterday, because we went to the opening of the Mexican American Cultural Center, which if you're in El Paso, if you ever visit, I would encourage you to go see, because they have a lot of great artwork from local artists, and some great exhibits. But it's also going to be a cultural center, so they have like talleres that they're going to be giving on art, the theater, dance studio.
An emphasis a lot on education and fostering that. I love that.
Yeah.
Again, going back to language, I like the discussion of the calo that was created here and used, and really slang. It speaks to the malleability, the flexibility, and the creativity, right, of this culture here to like adapt all these different languages together and create new words, and that's how language works.
Yeah, I mean the word Pachuco itself, right? And I know that people in Califas, Reina or whoever else might want to take credit for the Pachuco, but maybe it's like an In-N-Out Whataburger thing, you know, where there's a rivalry there. But
I did not know about the Zasus in Paris though. So I like the discussion on how it initially wasn't, but ended up kind of taking a political
right.
meaning behind it.
And even the Nazis, right, come into play here because, you know, they labeled swing music and jazz music as like quote unquote degenerate, right? And so it kind of again points out the importance of like, well, we gotta stay strong through our art, you know, instead of like assimilating and like, you know, it's like with Trump, for example, taking over the Kennedy Center, and there was a quote where he was talking about, well, we gotta like bring in like, you know, more white musicals, and the example he thought it was like Cats, you know, but then he started rambling about it and saying that, oh, well, actually, Cats, like it's kind of like, you know, diverse or whatever, but yeah. But again, just, you know, the power of art and being a tool for the oppressed.
Yeah, these subcultures, or as I think David says, underground cultures, right, at the end of this section. So we kind of covered education, right, discrepancies for students. So that led to actual being pre-Brown versus Board education, right, cases.
Yeah, Crystal City. And then the other walkout in Uvalde later on 256. And to me, you know, this part just hit different, of course, because of the Uvalde shooting. Because, you know, reading about it here, this walkout and the way that the Texas Rangers, you know, were so oppressive, you find out it's actually the same school, right? Robb Elementary, where the shooter ended up going and where the police response was pretty much non-existent until so many kids had ended up dying. So
yeah, I wasn't familiar with this history in Uvalde and the walkout, and it's interesting how it kind of started this whole thing about the cheerleaders, right? But it did highlight again the discrepancy in the system, right? And the response was interesting, right? And this resulted in them requiring, like, in order to try out to be a cheerleader, parents had to have a college degree, which is classist, right? At that point, like, you know, you can't really. A lot of the parents there were not college graduates, so that severely limited who could try out. But to see that it picked up steam enough for it to actually make a difference, that was great.
And it also brings us into the discussion of like fair representation, like the need for diversity, because the students here were asking for like, well, we want more Mexican teachers, right? Mexican American teachers. And, you know, that's where a lot of the conflict also arose. And right now, of course, there's a ban in the, like, not just a ban in like diversity practices itself, but even like the word, right? There's a list of words that's going around from Pen America that like you can't say those words anymore, right? You might get in trouble.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Very Orwellian.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention it earlier with the like the repatriation, right? Like the way we label things, right? Too.
Yeah. Like euphemisms.
Yeah. Ooh, we skipped over the Lalo Delgado poem. I really love that. The Chicano, like, kind of did skip over the Chicano movement and all that stuff. And I see Chicano as a political kind of designation too, but I don't know about you guys. Because, you know, there's a lot to be said about like how we identify ourselves, label ourselves. Latino, Latinx, like Chicano. And we've had these discussions previously, like way with other books, you know. And to me, I always consider Chicano a little political, but I don't know. Other people say otherwise. Like in the sense that it's about like also like your history, right? And like being a little bit like politically conscious of your identity,
Right.
Like even the term itself, I think, is a rejection of like Hispanic or
Yeah.
so.
And then, of course, there's the versions that are gender neutral, right?
Chicken
Chicken
X, and
eggs,
yeah.
and more rooted in like the X, with like X Chicken X as well.
And I see a lot of fallback on that when it's Latinx, Chicanx, and people always say like, that's not really how we use it. It's
Right.
interesting because now it's like Latine
Right.
or Chicane, like that's as being more gender neutral. So it's, it's
Because it
it's a
doesn't
complicated
translate.
mess.
It doesn't translate well in Spanish with
Exactly.
the X, so
Right.
we changed it to the E.
Yeah. And just like you were saying, right, with Hispanic, we get the how it's being used in the census, and
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting when they had us fill those out, like when I was growing up in school. And then I'd be filling out that section and I'd be like, well, which one do I put? And they would be like, just put white. And I was like, but that's not what I am.
Yeah.
And they would be like, no, it's fine. Just put that.
right.
And to see like the options and be like, that's it? That's all I
Yeah.
have? Like that's a little anxiety inducing. Yeah, David has these little statements on 264 here, right? I think that are really great. And I think, again, thinking back to who the audience is for, who this is for mostly, right? I think it's just a great, like, summary or summation, So in 264, he talks about, like, the census and labeling, right? Making people invisible is another way to oppress them, to make them feel that they don't count. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, we saw this again, right? History repeated itself in 2020, because I remember there, the controversy was that, well, if you count undocumented immigrants, right, are you going to be deported? And so that was, some of the issues. And then, of course, it went up to the Supreme Court whether, they could be included. So, yeah, I mean, the census itself, right? I mean, it seems benign, but it's super important for representation.
Yeah. Speaking of representation and art and the Mellon Foundation, right? There's this nice section here on Judith Baca and the wall mural that covers a lot of, they call it the Great Wall of Los Angeles or the history of California.
Yeah.
Which focused a lot on untold stories of women, people of color, and LGBT people. Yeah, I was surprised to see that was funded by the Mellon Foundation.
Yeah. Yeah, the Mellon, funds so many great projects out there.
Yeah. There's a section here on Anzaldúa. I mean, I love Anzaldúa. I consider her essential to any bookshelf here as well.
Yeah.
Along with this one now too.
Yeah. On 277, I don't know if anyone had something before.
Oh, the letter?
Yeah, the letter.
I had not heard about that,
yeah.
actually. So I thought it was really fascinating. But go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, as I was reading this today, just yesterday, actually, I brought a little show and tell or, but, the Berlin Wall, we get the history here. And so what I have here, my grandmother gifted me, and she said, oh, you're going to be the only nieto who has this. She was actually there when the Berlin Wall fell, the Mauer fell. And so what you gave me is like some of the fragments that they were passing out from the wall. And you can see them here that, they're still colored, because as you can see in the photo there, like the Berlin Wall was also, colored. And so she was able to get some of these fragments and, decided to pass them out down to me. So I wanted to show you guys, so you can take a look and kind of see, the just the material itself, and but it was kind of eerie, reading, because I was just reading about this today, and then just yesterday is when my grandmother gave me that.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And she was only there because it was like, she was teaching at university, and then I think they had attended some kind of like symposium or something in Spain, or some conference. But she decided that she was going to take an extra week to go to Berlin. But I don't think she knew that like it was going to fall. So I don't know, but just kind of serendipity, I guess. But yeah, I mean, going back to this letter, right? I mean, you see how this kind of system of apartheid is so damaging to a community, right? Just like with the wall here, the wall, in the West Bank, and so kind of I like how David kind of hints, right, at like, well, maybe one day, this wall will fall, and like we'll be distributing the pieces of it to others here.
Yep. No wall lasts forever.
Yeah.
So I think the following kind of sections just kind of dive further into like the politicization of the border, and really what leads to a more militarized presence on the border. So again, this comes up a lot in our works. I think
Yeah.
Border Simulator again, and
Yeah. Who's going to be here, right, in a couple of weeks. So
yeah,
Gabriel, shout out to Gabriel Losal.
yeah. But and again, just seeing how Bowie is at the epicenter of one of these stories here, where you have a hole in the fence, really, and that leads to a lot of students and faculty getting harassed by Border Patrol and profiled, which again is leads to a case, right? Kind of a prominent case here.
And I believe it was the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, or at least, council, who were ultimately their nonprofit that we have hosted at Papagayo, through Beto Mesta. But just kind of thinking about, it's local activists, local attorneys, representing the Bowie students. And again, I mean, just like Point of Light, right? We see, actually going back to, what was it called? The Hate You Give, right? About the importance of the legal system in using it, to bring about change. And of course, today, we still see this to this day. And so there's still a lot of organizing. In some ways, it's gotten worse because of ICE going out into the communities, right? Versus Border Patrol that's kind of just, limited there to the border itself.
Yeah. It's always kind of been a concern. I think growing up here, right, there's always kind of one of the things I'd hear from students, La Migra, like, alien.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. Here's another name that I hoped I'd never read again. Jan Brewer, the Arizona governor, and at this point, I remember being pretty politically active in college, and the banning of the Mexican American Studies program, the teaching of it, and
in the Libro Traficantes, they came about as a result. Yeah. Tony Diaz. Here on 299, he mentions Jeff. Staff members there locked arms in front of school doors to prevent students from leaving the campus. And so there's a lot of, again, I really like how David does bring in, local connections when possible, because these walkouts had occurred all around Texas, and LA as well. So.
Yeah. And going back to the storytelling, I like how he brings up these students here that are known for being like good students, well behaved, and how they decided to participate in a lot of these protests and walkout, like the student Beatriz Sanchez, right? There's that on page 300. Beatriz, like millions of undocumented people throughout the country, decided that the price of staying silent was greater than that of speaking out. And I mentioned this I think in the first part, right? But how the first chapter mentioned kids, but also the ancestors. Here you have Isabel Navarro talking about this, where she's kind of remembering it, and she says, "I was crying because I was remembering my grandpa, and I was doing it for his honor. It was a bittersweet day." Speaking of, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna read the last sentence in
Okay.
that chapter on 301. The largest protest in the history of the United States was a demonstration that the forgotten people are no longer willing to disappear. Kind of full circle of like where we came from now.
And that's how even how he starts this book, talking about forgotten people. And even in the next chapter, he goes back to the footprints, right? The ghost prints, right? He mentions that again. We talk about dreamers and DACA.
Kind of looking also at, of course, how President Obama wasn't, as receptive, right? And it took actual activists doing sit-ins there, to get DACA done. And how he had deported, more than any president before him. And
we got to see him speak when he visited El Paso. We had the special passes, and we got to go, and that was something else. And
right in front of Bowie, right there.
Yep. Yeah, right there.
The epicenter.
I do like the emphasis on grassroots, the grassroots movement and community, and that's what makes me think of all the stuff happening right now with the Chicano Studies Club, or what do they call it? The
Chicanx movement.
Yeah, and like maybe what we do with Papagayo, how it's like kind of related to school, but outside too, and the podcast, and
it's almost like taking a mirror, right, and kind of seeing like, well, this is us, right? Like we're here.
I like that quote there, and at the end of the day, our work is about learning together, constructing communities, creating relationships, dismantling white supremacy, and dismantling patriarchy. So it's so easy to be cynical, and you see the repetition, you see the history, you see the violence and the rhetoric, and it's so easy to just fall completely into cynicism. But I think these stories here of people who fight back, and I think we have to have that fire within us too. And I'm glad that he's included all these stories and these quotes and stories of these figures as well.
Yeah. And not just adults, right? But going back to kids.
Absolutely.
And then the artists from Tornillo, the kids who were in detention there. And, I'm sure you all know about the Tornillo detention camp that had very miserable conditions and also was part of the family separation from President Trump. But again, Yolanda Leiva actually was instrumental in, getting that artwork along with Father Garcia. And I don't know if you guys ever got to see the exhibit there at the Centennial, but it was very powerful because it wasn't just the artwork, but they also set up like the detention beds there and some of their belongings. So
yeah, I think I went with you for the part of the Mellon Foundation Fellowship.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that exhibit.
I think I mentioned in the first part, but David's recollection is that the fact that this was happening, they were still inspired to make beautiful things. Is that?
Yeah. Man. And so it's sad to kind of see this again, with people sent to Guantanamo Bay or back to their own countries, and also again, separated, right? And it seems worse now because like, they're actively targeting, profiling like U.S. citizens and, permanent residents. So, I mean, not that they didn't do that before, of course, but I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's frustrating.
The fact that it's so well documented now more than ever, because here he's recounting instances in the past, but now because we have social media and social networking, it's there. We see it.
Right.
To see people's apathy or cruelty towards it, right? You often hear that the point is the cruelty, like
Right.
it is very frustrating, right? And that's
Yeah.
why. I mean, you see what I mean. So he talks about how you have the Great Replacement theory being put out there, right? And the way pundits like people like Tucker Carlson and the like kind of continue to spread these ideas, and how the rhetoric leads to things like Patrick Crucius, right? Which is a part in here, and
Right.
we all kind of experience that and know about that. It's heavy to read about again, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but, I always think about it whenever I go to Walmart. Just in the back of my head, it's always there. Or actually any kind of place, right? I always think about like, okay, what if there's a shooting here? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't have to be like that. And of course, Abbott and again, critical race theory is kind of brought up here at the end. I really do like, and I think this is kind of a great way to position David's book itself on page 318. Kind of what critical race theory is, right? And at the bottom of that paragraph, one way to try to regain the dignity and humanity of the people of color who have been kept down in the past is by telling counter stories. Recovering forgotten histories of people who dedicated their lives to better the communities is one example of these counter stories. So it's something he's been doing this entire book. He talked about the Mexican American Cultural Center now. They have an oral history center there that they're putting together as well, right? Like a project.
Yeah. And it reminds me also of like the juntas that you mentioned with the Mexican Revolution, right? And it was funny kind of hearing how they were like counter juntas and like counter juntas, right? Like,
oh yeah, that with the county, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, it all starts with what movement, right? Like, no one here ever did any of this alone, right? Carmelita and others, like, there were others there by their side that acted in unison. But it did take a lot of times one person to kind of get the ball rolling there.
Yeah, these last sections, David tells more stories of students kind of really taking it upon themselves to try and make change. I really love this section here from these students here. The ones who wrote the letter to Obama.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I referenced it a couple of times, right? But what does that student say? We had to do something for our ancestors, he said. And the response was pretty disappointing, of course.
Right.
But that didn't stop them. So that, this idea of them asking for justice or like something, for his ancestors.
And ultimately, the governor there, Jerry Brown, did sign it into law. But then you hear that like they didn't get reparations after that.
Well, the following governors vetoed those bills, right? Which, again, if we've been reading this entire book and following the history, something that keeps happening, right?
Yeah.
Broken promises.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, we get the uncaged art exhibit again from Tornillo.
Yeah.
But kind of going to Victor Casas, who, you and I, both know as a muralist.
I see him all the time running down the block. I go eat at my pan. He's always there.
Yeah.
We always chat it up.
And then we find out here, guess where he went? Bowie, right? And so...
Yeah, he's actually very active in the neighborhood, and taking care of telling the stories through art, but also making sure that this is going to be an interesting can of worms, possibly, but making sure artists don't take advantage of it, and so quote unquote sell out for corporate,
right?
Something that's kind of been a little bit of a debate in the local artist world and murals and stuff. Who's sponsoring what artwork and so on. And so for Victor, it's really important that he has the blessing of the community in work and understanding their wants and desires, including when they feel encroached on.
Yeah, I mean, that brings to mind La X, right? And how that, David, I think it is, right, who has written about that in his poem about how it's commissioned and like, again, right, yeah, I think it's important to keep art organic. And I think that's one thing with like influencers nowadays is like, well, who is like, bankrolling them, right? And yeah, I mean, of course you got to make a living, but if it's ultimately for like this shadowed, corporation or like company that, yeah, gets problematic.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's so much more to dig up here, and I'm interested in reading the other books in this series.
Yeah.
I think this was so well done, and I think that this is gonna be something that I buy as a gift for people in
Yeah.
the future. Like, I think that'd be something I'd want to do
Yeah.
to spread the word, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I'm thinking for part 3, we may include a audio of him speaking about the book, reading passages, and maybe answering questions from students.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd
That's
be great.
the goal.
That'd be great for
Yeah.
part 3.
To include the students.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Given the students were so vocal in so many of these stories here.
Yeah. It's all full circle.
Yeah.
and so if you do live around, be on the lookout for one project, Regeneración, which is kind of a group dedicated to the story of Duranguito, and that does include these tours that David Romo hosts and has other people do storytelling elements as well. David also has a group called Los Liminals, and it's a jazz fusion spoken word band that features some of the best in El Paso as well. My friend Adriana, who's an amazing singer and storyteller and poet herself. Fernando Lechuga, currently, I think, who's a legendary pianist in his own right, with the band Azúcar. And if you've lived in El Paso, you've probably gone to shows where they've played and you danced to their music. So, there's a lot of culture happening here, and we got to keep creating it.
Yeah.
And coming together in community.
Oh, and actually, sorry, one more thing is I'm glad I remembered. If you have a sec, drop us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and it's just so that we can kind of get in the algorithm more. As search results are influenced by popularity. So it does help, if you drop us a rating. We're hoping, for a 5 or whatever the most stars is, but we'd appreciate it and you always welcome feedback. Like, you can leave us a voicemail, you can leave us a comment now on Spotify, and we do try to reply to those. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, recorded at Power at the Pass and brought to you by Border Census. This episode, we continued our discussion on Borderlands and the Mexican-American story by David Dorado Romo. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Join us on our next episode and follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep.